José Ramírez was a specter on the streets of Mexico City, a 45-year-old man whose existence blended into the chaotic urban landscape he had navigated for over 2 decades. His motorcycle wasn't just a vehicle, but an extension of his body, a tool with which he wove together a living for his family, stitching through the infernal traffic of the metropolis. Every alley, every shortcut, every dark corner was a map, etched in his memory, knowledge acquired not through study, but from the raw necessity of survival. He was an anonymous face in the crowd, an honest worker whose greatest dream was simple: to provide a dignified life for his wife, Elena, and his daughter, Sofia. Stories like José's happen every day, in every corner of the world, and that's why I need your help to ensure they are not forgotten. If we can reach 1,000 subscribers, I can continue to bring these accounts to light. Please, comment on where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel so more people can know this journey. José's life was a routine of silent sacrifices, a cycle of hard work that began before sunrise and ended long after it set. He knew the city not by its monuments, but by its scars. The endemic violence, the corruption that seeped in like a slow poison, and the impunity that mocked good men. In his neighborhood, the presence of the local gang was a constant shadow, a parallel power that dictated the rules, collected tolls, and claimed lives without consequence. José felt helplessness corroding his soul, the frustration of knowing that the system meant to protect him was broken, an accomplice to the disorder. He saw the fear in his neighbor's eyes and shared it, a fear that intensified every time he thought about his daughter's future in that lawless place. Sofia, at 16, was the light that dispelled the darkness in José's life. She was the personification of hope, an intelligent young woman full of dreams that contrasted with the harsh reality of her surroundings. José remembered teaching her to ride a bike on the very same streets he now feared. He saw in her the promise of a better future, a future for which he fought tirelessly. José's greatest pride was hearing Sofia talk about her plans to go to university, to become an architect, to build a more beautiful and safer world. That image of his daughter smiling as she described her projects was the fuel that kept him going, the beacon that guided his actions, and the reason he endured the crushing weight of his reality. The gang that dominated the territory was led by an enigmatic and sadistic figure known only as El Sombra. His cruelty was legendary, and his influence extended to the highest echelons of the local police. Thanks to an arrangement with corrupt officials like Captain Morales, El Sombra and his men acted with complete freedom, turning the neighborhood into their private fiefdom. José saw them every day, young men armed and flaunting their power, extorting merchants and spreading terror. He would look away, like everyone else, swallowing his anger and humiliation. He knew that confronting them was a death sentence, and his family's safety was the only thing that mattered, a fragile treasure he had to protect at all costs, even if it meant living on his knees. The nights in the Ramírez home were a refuge, a bubble of normality amidst the chaos. The sound of the television drowned out the distant sirens, and the aroma of Elena's cooking filled the small apartment, creating a sense of sanctuary. It was in these moments that José allowed himself to forget the world outside. Conversations revolved around daily life, Sofia's grades at school, plans for the weekend. However, behind the facade of tranquility, an underlying tension persisted. A worried glance exchanged with Elena, a louder noise from the street that made him jump. The peace was precarious, a thin layer of ice over a deep, dark lake, and José knew that at any moment it could break. José's internal conflict was a silent battle waged in his mind every night before sleep. He was not a violent man. His instinct was that of a provider, a protector. But how could he protect his family when the monsters roamed freely under the protection of those who were supposed to fight them? He felt like a coward for his passivity, for bowing his head and following the unwritten rules of survival. The image of Captain Morales, with his cynical smile and arrogant posture, haunted his thoughts. Morales personified the system's betrayal, the moral failure that allowed evil to flourish. José wondered how many more tragedies it would take for something to change, not knowing that the next one would be his own. The vulnerability of his family became palpable one Sunday afternoon. While walking with Sofia through the neighborhood square, two gang members approached her with vulgar and aggressive comments. José's blood boiled. He stepped between them, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and fury, and managed to drive them away with a firm gaze and a stance he didn't know he possessed. But the incident left him deeply shaken. The arrogance in the criminals' eyes, the certainty that they could do whatever they wanted, made him realize that luck would not always be on his side. That night, he didn't sleep, spending hours watching the street from his window, his heart heavy with the premonition that the darkness surrounding his life was drawing dangerously close to his door. The eve of the tragedy was marked by a deceptive calm, a final moment of happiness that would be etched in José's memory like an open wound. They had dinner together, celebrating a small victory. Sofia had won first place in a school science fair. Her smile lit up the entire room, infecting Elena and José with a pure and genuine joy. They made plans, they daydreamed, they talked about a trip to the beach, a luxury they had never been able to afford, but that seemed possible in the warmth of that moment. It was the last time José would see his daughter smile. That night of peace was the quiet before the storm, the last breath of a world that was about to be irrevocably destroyed, leaving behind only the wreckage of a man and the birth of a monster. The crack that pulverized José's universe wasn't the sound of a gunshot, but the silence that followed it. Sofia had gone out to buy bread at the corner bakery, a mundane task she did almost every day. This time, however, she crossed paths with two gang members on a motorcycle, desperate for drug money. The robbery was quick, violent, and unnecessary. They took her phone and the little money she carried, but out of sheer sadism, or perhaps because they recognized her as the daughter of the man who had challenged them with a look, one of them fired. The news hit José like a thunderclap that split him in two. He ran to the street and found her lying on the asphalt, the bread scattered around her, the warmth of her life draining away on the cold, dirty concrete. José's world didn't just go dark, it ceased to exist. The pain that followed was an ocean of acid, dissolving everything José had been. At the morgue, the coldness of the room mirrored the emptiness in his chest. Seeing Sofia's body, once so vibrant and full of life, now still and pale under a fluorescent light, was a torture that broke something fundamental within him. Elena collapsed, her screams echoing through the sterile hallways, a sound of pure agony that would haunt José forever. He, however, remained silent, a statue of suffering. The tears wouldn't come. In their place, a glacial fury began to form, a core of hatred so intense it burned hotter than any sorrow. He held his daughter's hand one last time, and the coldness of her skin was the final piece of his old soul to shatter. The investigation was a grotesque farce, a piece of theater staged to humiliate him further. At the police station, Captain Morales received him with a rehearsed sympathy, offering empty condolences while his eyes showed a profound boredom. The questions were perfunctory, the promises of justice hollow. José gave them the names, the descriptions, the details of the harassment Sofia had endured days before. He knew who the culprits were, the whole neighborhood knew, but Morales just jotted it down in his notebook, with the slowness of someone who had already decided that nothing would be done. To the corrupt police, the life of a poor neighborhood girl was just another statistic, an inconvenience that would soon be forgotten to protect their lucrative schemes with organized crime. The confirmation of impunity came a week later, a slap in the face that rekindled the flame of his rage. Across the street, José saw his daughter's two murderers. They were sitting in front of a store, drinking beer and laughing loudly, as if nothing had happened. They saw him, and one of them made a subtle gesture, a scornful smile that was both a confession and a taunt. In that moment, José's pain transmuted into something more dangerous, purpose. The image of his daughter dead on the ground superimposed itself on the sight of those men living freely, mocking his loss. The system had not just failed, it was complicit. Justice wasn't blind, it had been bought. His grief transformed into an overwhelming certainty that waiting for help was futile. That night, sitting in the darkness of his workshop, the smell of oil and metal filling the air, José made a decision. The man who was content to look away was dead, buried alongside his daughter. What remained was a grieving father with an encyclopedic knowledge of Mexico City's veins and arteries and a burning desire for balance. He would no longer wait for justice, divine or earthly. He would forge it himself with his own hands. That feeling of powerlessness that had paralyzed him for years gave way to a grim determination. If the system refused to punish the guilty, he would become the executioner himself. That was the moment José Ramírez, the mototaxista, died, and from his ashes the Vigilante was born. He took the keys to his motorcycle, and the sound of the engine roaring in the night was his declaration of war. The first hunt was an act of pure, visceral fury. José used his knowledge of the streets not as a mototaxista, but as a predator. He knew the schedules, the hideouts, the places where the rats felt safe. He found Sophia's first killer in a fetid alley, numbed by cheap drugs. There was no dialogue, no judgment, only the explosion of a lifetime of accumulated pain and humiliation, culminating in the loss of his daughter. The violence was clumsy, brutal, and ugly. José felt no pleasure, only an emptying, as if he had torn out a piece of his own soul along with the criminal's life. He left the body there, a silent message to the night, and returned home with trembling hands and a heart beating to the rhythm of a war drum. The second target was more difficult. Alerted by the death of his accomplice, he had gone into hiding, but no one knew the city like José. For days, he rode tirelessly, the engine of his motorcycle a constant hum that became part of the neighborhood's soundscape. He watched, he waited, and the patience he had learned in traffic became his greatest weapon. He found him trying to flee at a bus station on the outskirts. This time, the confrontation was different. The man begged, cried, tried to justify the unjustifiable. José listened in silence, his face hidden by the shadow of his helmet. His daughter's scream echoed in his mind, drowning out any plea. He dragged him into the darkness and delivered justice with the coldness of an executioner, feeling the ice spread through his veins. The bodies began to appear, and with them, the whispers. In the markets, the alleys and the bars, people spoke of an avenging angel, a shadow on two wheels that was cleaning the scum from the streets. The corrupt police scoffed, treating the cases as simple score settling between gangs. But the residents knew the truth. They saw the precision, the specific targets. Only the most notorious criminals, those whom justice refused to touch, were being found. Fear began to switch sides. Petty dealers and thieves became more cautious, looking over their shoulders, dreading the sound of a motorcycle approaching in the dead of night. For an abandoned people, José's violence wasn't a crime. It was a prayer. Answered, Elena felt the change in her husband. The man who came home was not the same one who left. The shared grief that had united them at first transformed into a chasm. José was quieter, more distant, his eyes carrying a darkness that frightened her. He barely slept, spending his nights in his workshop or simply disappearing for hours. She found bloodstains on his clothes, which he explained away as traffic brawls. But she knew it was more than that. The stench of violence seemed to be ingrained in his skin. She watched the man she loved turn into a stranger, a ghost haunted by a pain he was trying to cure with more pain. And the fear of what he had become began to outweigh the grief for the daughter they had lost. It was Anna, a young and ambitious investigative journalist who gave a name to the legend. Intrigued by the series of murders of criminals and the inaction of the police, She began to connect the dots. Her articles, published on an independent news blog, spoke of a mysterious figure, a vigilante who acted where the state failed. She christened him the Vigilante, and the name caught fire, spreading throughout the city. Anna didn't paint him as a hero or a villain, but as a symptom of a sick society. Her reports gave a voice to the public's frustration and put the police, especially Captain Morales, under an unwanted spotlight, forcing him to intensify the hunt for the man who had become public enemy number one. The Vigilante's reputation reached the ears of El Sombra. At first, he dismissed the threat, seeing it as a minor problem. But when his most trusted men began to be eliminated one by one with surgical precision, he realized he wasn't dealing with an ordinary rival. This was not a gangster trying to take his territory. It was something different, something personal. El Sombra, a man who built his empire through intelligence and brutality, was both intrigued and enraged. He saw the Vigilante not just as an obstacle, but as a direct challenge to his authority, a distorted reflection of himself. The hunt was no longer just a police matter. Now it was personal for the crime boss, who mobilized all his resources to find and destroy the shadow that haunted him. Meanwhile, within the police force, Detective Martinez wrestled with his conscience. Young and idealistic, he had joined the force to make a difference, only to find himself surrounded by the corruption personified by his superior, Captain Morales. Martinez saw the investigations into the Vigilante being sabotaged, leads ignored, all to protect El Sombra's interests. Secretly, he admired the Vigilante's results, seeing a raw form of justice being served where his own failed. Torn between his duty and his morals, he made a risky decision. Using a burner phone, he made an anonymous call to Anna, the journalist, leaking a small piece of information about a drug shipment, a test to see what the Vigilante would do with it. The information from Martinez, relayed by Anna on her blog in a coded message, reached José. He recognized the location, a warehouse that had always been a hub for trafficking. For the first time, he wasn't acting on direct revenge, but proactively. He watched the place for a full night, planning his attack with a new clarity. The rage was still there, but it was now channeled through a cold, calculated strategy. He broke into the warehouse in the middle of the night, not to kill, but to destroy. He torched the shipment, sabotaged the vehicles, and left a message scrawled on the wall, a warning for El Sombra. The action was a success, causing $1 million loss to the gang, and proving to José that he could be more than an avenger. He could be a force of destabilization. El Sombra's response was immediate and savage. Furious at the audacity of the attack, he escalated the brutality of his operations. He ordered public executions of small-time debtors and suspected informants, leaving the bodies in visible locations with messages mocking the Vigilante, trying to lure him into a trap. The city plunged into a new cycle of fear. El Sombra wanted to turn public opinion against the Vigilante, showing that his actions only generated more violence and chaos. For José, each new body was a burden on his conscience, an unintended consequence of his war. He felt responsible, questioning whether his crusade was truly saving the innocent or just putting them in the crossfire. The apartment that was once a home became a silent battlefield for José and Elena. The distance between them was now an ocean. Elena no longer asked questions. Her gaze was a mixture of accusation and fear. One night, she confronted him, not with anger, but with a profound sadness. "The man I fell in love with wouldn't kill anyone, José. He wouldn't hide in the shadows. I want him back," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Her words were like knives in José's heart, because he knew she was right. That man was dead. He couldn't go. Back he couldn't stop. The path he had chosen was a one-way street, and he was condemned to walk it alone, losing the only person who still represented the light in his life. Detective Martinez, seeing the escalating violence, felt he had to do more. He began leaking more crucial information to the journalist Ana, details about corrupt police patrol routes that protected El Sombra's shipments and the locations of drug labs. He became an unlikely ally in the shadows, waging his own war against corruption from the inside. Martinez knew he was risking his career and his life, but the image of José Ramírez, whom he had seen in the case file, haunted him. He saw the Vigilante as a dangerous but necessary tool to expose the rot infesting the department. His silent collaboration began to give José a tactical advantage he never had before. With the new information, José became even more daring and efficient. He was no longer just a punishing ghost, but a strategist who dismantled El Sombra's organization piece by piece. He intercepted shipments, destroyed labs, and exposed hideouts, always one step ahead of Morales's police and Sombra's men. Each successful operation was a victory for the oppressed and a humiliation for his enemies. His legend grew, and with it, the hope of the residents. They began to help him anonymously, leaving notes on his motorcycle with information about criminal activities, creating a grassroots intelligence network. The Vigilante was no longer one man. He was a movement. The tension between El Sombra and Captain Morales reached a boiling point. The crime boss, losing money and power, accused Morales of incompetence and even betrayal. The pressure on the corrupt captain was immense. He needed to capture the Vigilante at any cost to appease his boss and maintain his lavish lifestyle. Morales turned the hunt into a personal obsession, using police resources illegally, tapping phones, and using informants to try to predict the Vigilante's next move. The city became a deadly chessboard, with three main players moving their pieces in the darkness: the Vigilante, organized crime, and the corrupt law. On a rainy night, José intercepted a call between Morales and El Sombra, thanks to a wiretap he had managed to install with his knack for improvisation. The conversation confirmed his worst suspicions. The symbiosis between the police and crime was total. They were not two separate entities, they were partners. Hearing Morales' promise, El Sombra, the head of the damn biker, ignited something in José. Revenge for Sofia was no longer enough. This was bigger. This was about breaking the spine of the system that allowed countless other Sofias to die every day. In that moment, he made a crucial decision. It was no longer enough to cut off the branches. He had to rip out the rotten tree by its roots. From that point on, his goal was not just to punish, but to completely destroy El Sombra's organization and expose Morales. This decision marked a turning point in his journey. He began to gather evidence, not just to act, but to expose. Using a micro camera, he recorded transactions, filmed the faces of police officers taking bribes, and documented the gang's operations. He was building a dossier, a bomb that would detonate the unholy alliance between Morales and El Sombra. This new mission consumed him completely, demanding a level of discipline and self-control he didn't know he possessed. The blind rage gave way to a focused fury, transforming him into a spy and saboteur. He knew he was delving deeper into a territory from which he might never return, but the image of his daughter gave him the strength to continue. The journalist Ana, following the anonymous tips from Martinez and investigating the Vigilante's actions, began to assemble her own puzzle. She realized that the Vigilante's attacks were not random, but followed a precise logic, aimed at weakening El Sombra's power structure. Her reports became more incisive, openly questioning the link between the police's failures and the gang's continued success. Ana became a threat to Morales, who tried to intimidate her by sending patrols to watch her apartment and warnings through third parties. But, like José, she was driven by a sense of justice that outweighed fear, determined to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The net was closing in on José. El Sombra, desperate, began to use increasingly cruel tactics, attacking civilians in areas where the Vigilante had operated, hoping to force him into a mistake. One of these attacks occurred near Sofia's old school. an act of desecration that hit José hard. He almost fell into the trap, rushing to the scene driven by emotion, but something stopped him. It was the memory of Elena's voice, the fear in her eyes. He realized that impulsiveness was his greatest weakness. He pulled back, watched from a distance, and saw the trap Sombra had set. It was a painful lesson. To defeat the monster, he had to be smarter and colder than him. Paranoia settled in. José saw threats everywhere, in every passing car, in every face in the crowd. Isolation was his shield and his prison. He stopped visiting the few friends he had left and moved his base of operations to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial zone. The only human contact he maintained was through the encrypted messages he exchanged with the network of anonymous informants and the news from Anna, which served as a map of his own impact. He was an urban legend, a whisper, but at a terrible cost. Solitude was a slow poison, and he fought daily not to forget the man he once was, the loving father who only wanted to protect his daughter. The relationship with Elena reached its breaking point. One evening, he returned home to find her bags packed. She was no longer crying. Her eyes were empty, resigned. "I can't live with a ghost anymore, José," she said. "I pray for you. I pray that you find peace. But I can't watch you destroy yourself any longer. Sophia wouldn't have wanted this." She kissed him on the forehead, a farewell kiss, and left. The door closing behind her was the most definitive sound of his new reality. He had won battles in the streets, but lost the war at home. Now he was truly alone, with nothing but his mission and his ghosts. Elena's departure, though devastating, freed José from the last anchor tying him to his old life. There was nothing left to lose. His determination solidified into something hard and unbreakable. He dove headfirst into planning the final attack. All the pain, all the loss, all the rage were channeled into a single purpose: the final confrontation with El Sombra and the exposure of Morales. He studied the maps, the routines, the vulnerabilities of his enemy with the obsession of a chess master preparing for checkmate. The journey had transformed him from victim to hunter, and from hunter to strategist. He was ready for the final move, knowing it would define not only his fate, but the legacy of his fight. Martinez, realizing that a confrontation was imminent, took his boldest step. He gained access to Morales's computer and found irrefutable proof of the corruption: payment records, orders to release gang members, and plans to ambush the Vigilante. He copied everything to a flash drive. He knew that handing it over to his superiors was useless, as he didn't know who to trust. He had two options: leak it to the press through Anna, or somehow get it to the Vigilante himself, the only person with the will and ability to use that information to bring down the whole scheme. His choice would seal the fate of everyone involved. El Sombra, feeling the net close in and his operations crumble, decided on one last, desperate gambit. He knew the Vigilante was motivated by a twisted form of protection for the innocent. To force a confrontation on his own terms, he planned an act of mass terror, hijacking a bus full of civilians and using them as a human shield. He broadcast the threat through his channels, an open challenge to the Vigilante. It was a clear trap, an invitation to the slaughterhouse. El Sombra was confident that his enemy's moral compass would lead him straight to his death, putting an end to the legend that terrorized his empire. The news of El Sombra's plan reached José through his network of informants. At almost the same time, the journalist Anna received an anonymous message with Martinez's flash drive. Anna, in possession of the bombshell information that could destroy Morales, and José, aware of the plan that put dozens of innocent lives at risk, found themselves at an impasse. José understood that El Sombra was luring him in. The confrontation he had so carefully planned would not happen on his terms. He would have to go to the beast's den, no longer as a hunter, but as a savior, which would leave him exposed and vulnerable. Meanwhile, the help I offered at the start of our journey has allowed Stories like José's to continue to be told. Many people have subscribed, and that support is what gives me the strength to dive deep into these narratives and bring the truth to light, no matter how painful. Each subscription is a reminder that I'm not alone in this fight to keep these voices from being lost in oblivion. If you feel connected to José's struggle and believe that justice, in one form or another, must prevail, please consider subscribing. Your support is crucial for me to continue. Sharing accounts that need to be heard. José spent the night in his warehouse, preparing for what he knew was his final battle. He cleaned his weapons, reviewed the map of the location El Sombra would use as the stage for his horror show, an old, abandoned industrial complex. He looked at a worn photo of Sofia he carried in his wallet, the only relic of his past life. The journey had led him to this point, to a confrontation that was no longer about revenge, but about a fundamental choice. The pain in his heart was a constant ember, but now, for the first time in a long time, he felt something beyond rage, a sense of duty. He was not a hero, but tonight he had to be one. The abandoned industrial complex was a skeleton of concrete and steel, a perfect stage for the final act. The light rain that had begun to fall mixed with the dust and rust, coating everything in a melancholic sheen. José cut his motorcycle's engine a safe distance away, approaching on foot, a shadow among shadows. He saw the bus, a yellow coffin under the emergency lights, with the terrified faces of the hostages pressed against the windows. El Sombra's men patrolled the perimeter, arrogant and nervous. Using the darkness and the decaying structures to his advantage, José began to infiltrate, moving with the silent fluidity of a ghost, every step calculated, every breath controlled. The rage that drove him was now a tool, cold and precise, ready to be wielded. At the exact moment, José neutralized the first sentry with terrifying efficiency. Anna's bombshell exploded. Her report went live, streamed across the internet, displaying the documents from Martinez's flash drive. Captain Morales' name and his ties to El Sombra were exposed for the entire city to see. The news spread like wildfire, causing panic and disarray in the police high command. For Morales, it was a death sentence. Desperate, he gathered his unit of loyalists, a squad of corrupt cops, and raced to the industrial complex. His objective was not to rescue hostages, but to erase all loose ends. El Sombra, the Vigilante, and any witness who could link him to the chaos. Inside the main building, El Sombra held a small group of hostages at gunpoint, using them as his final shield. It was there that he and José finally met. The air crackled with unbearable tension. "So the ghost has a face," El Sombra mocked, his sadistic smile illuminated by the dim light. "You think you're different from me? Look at yourself. You've killed. You've terrorized. You've become the very thing you hunt, all to avenge a single life." The words were poison, designed to corrode José's resolve. But the Vigilante remained silent, the barrel of his gun steady. He was no longer there for the past. He was there to stop El Sombra from creating new destroyed futures like his own. The standoff was shattered by the sound of screeching tires and gunfire. Morales' unit had arrived, storming the complex with uncontrolled fury, shooting at anything that moved. Chaos erupted. Gangsters fired at cops and cops fired at gangsters. Almost simultaneously, the honest tactical team, now with the authority to arrest Morales, began to surround the perimeter, announcing their presence over loudspeakers, trying to control a situation that had devolved into a three-way war zone. The hostages screamed, caught in the crossfire. El Sombra's plan for a controlled confrontation disintegrated into an anarchic battle for survival, where every side was an enemy to all others. In the midst of the pandemonium, José became a lethal guardian angel. His mission changed instantly. Vengeance could wait. Innocent lives could not. He moved through the firefight with a clear purpose, not just as an aggressor, but as a protector. He took down one of Morales's men who was firing toward the bus, then eliminated a gangster who was preparing to execute a panicked hostage. His movements were a deadly ballet, using the chaos as cover to guide the terrified civilians to safety, pushing them behind heavy machinery, away from the lines of fire. In a few short minutes, the Vigilante, the monster the city spoke of, was actively saving the people he had sworn to protect. Finally, in a lull in the fighting, he cornered El Sombra. The crime boss was wounded, limping as he tried to reach a back exit. José took him down. The man responsible for Sofia's death was at his feet, helpless and pathetic. The image of his enemy's mocking smile mingled with the memory of his daughter's lifeless face. Revenge was right there, a simple pull of the trigger away. The sound of the honest cop's sirens grew louder. He had seconds. To kill him would be the end of his pain, the final act of retribution. To let him live would be what? A betrayal of his daughter's memory, or the only chance to save himself. His decision was instant, brutal, and definitive. He didn't shoot. Instead, with a controlled fury, he shattered El Sombra's legs with an iron pipe, ensuring he would never walk or escape justice again. A scream of agony echoed through the warehouse. "Prison is too good for you," José snarled. "You will live, and you will remember my daughter's face every day in the hell where you will rot." As the tactical unit stormed the location, finding the hostages safe and the villains, both gang members and cops, incapacitated or dead, José had already vanished. He slipped through a back passage and disappeared into the rainy night, leaving behind the broken body of his enemy and a chance at redemption, gravely wounded, exhausted, but with his soul just barely still intact. Mexico City awoke to a new day, one with fewer monsters on the loose. The news featured the faces of El Sombra, captured and disfigured, and Captain Morales, arrested and disgraced. The operation at the industrial complex was officially credited to an elite task force led by the newly promoted Detective Martinez, who began a deep clean of the police department. The journalist Ana became a leading name in investigative reporting, but in her stories she always left a question hanging in the air. Where was the Vigilante? To the city, he was the anonymous catalyst, the dark hero who forced the light into the cracks. The violence of the climax gave way to a necessary purge, and for the first time in years, there was a fragile but real feeling that justice was possible. Far from the spotlight, in his sanctuary of metal and grease, José Ramírez fought to stay. Alive, his wounds were severe, and he treated them with items from the same first aid kit he carried on his motorcycle, stitching his own skin with an upholstery needle and disinfecting the wounds with alcohol. The physical pain was a welcome distraction from the abyssal emptiness in his soul. He had won. His daughter's killers were dead or imprisoned. The corrupt system that protected them was in ruins. He had saved innocent people. But as he looked at his reflection in a piece of a broken mirror, he didn't see a winner. He saw a hollow man, a ghost haunted by the loss of everything he had ever loved. His daughter, his wife, his identity. Victory tasted like bitter ashes. Months passed. The change in his old neighborhood was palpable. Children began to play in the streets until dusk again. Small businesses, once held hostage by extortion, thrived. The fear that had once hung in the air like a toxic fog had dissipated, replaced by a cautious hope. The legend of the Vigilante became a cautionary tale whispered among criminals, a boogeyman who hunted in the shadows. José's sacrifice, unknown to all, had bought peace for the community he so loved. He watched it all from a distance, a spectator to his own work, an architect who could never live in the house he had built. The peace he brought to others was the same peace he would never know himself. Looking out over the city from a random rooftop, José reflected on the path he had traveled. He didn't know if what he did was right, if vengeance justified the means, if his soul could be saved. But he knew that stories like his needed to be told, so that perhaps, in the future, no one else would have to walk such a dark path. The support I received to tell this story, every person who subscribed and watched until the end, gave purpose to this sharing. It was because of you that José's struggle was not just a silent scream. I am grateful for every one of you, and I ask that you continue to support, so that we never forget the victims and the battles waged in the shadows for justice. The Mexico City night was a sea of lights, vibrant and indifferent. For José, it was his domain, his exile. He was no longer a father, a husband, or a mototaxista. Those men were dead. What remained was a symbol, a solitary figure condemned to watch from the shadows he had once sworn to fight. The sound of a distant siren cut through the air, a familiar call. He didn't hesitate. He pulled on his helmet, and his silhouette moved. With a renewed purpose, melting into the darkness. His personal war was over, but the city's war was eternal. And he, the Vigilante, was now one of its perpetual soldiers, an anonymous guardian on an endless watch.